Hi, I'm Kat, and I have moved a couple of pets around the world now, including here to France, where I live in Paris. So I will be walking you through the process of bringing pets to France. First, here's my example. Not small animals by any means. My dog Bella and my cat Pepe. My cat Pepe actually was born in the US, and I brought him down to Panama with us when we moved to Panama. And then when I moved from Panama to France, we had adopted Bella as well in Panama. So the two of them traveled together in the cargo. I thought it would be better for them to be together. Bella obviously couldn't come with us in the cabin, so I thought it would be better for them to be together rather than separate them. Of course, when I brought Pepe on his own, he was able to just be a carry on, and I was able to bring him in the cabin. And so that was them in Paris, or sorry, in Panama. This is them arriving in Paris, coming off the belt there, and then waiting outside the luggage carousel for our taxi, all of us a little bit a little bit worse for wear after the big trip. Happy finally in their new home. My dog Bella, as I said, was adopted in Panama, so she had never experienced anything under 70 degrees and air conditioning, and we brought her over here in December, and it was very cold, so we bought her little sweaters, and she adapted, but it took her a while. And there's Pepe the cat. He immediately got stuck behind this set of drawers. I don't really know how he did it, but he managed to wait. I guess we had opened the drawer halfway and he managed to go into the drawer, into the backside, and then got stuck, couldn't figure out how to get out. So this is him stuck halfway in the drawer and halfway behind the drawer. And we had to take the drawer apart to get to him in our new apartment. So cats will have fun settling in, dogs as well, with all the new scents outside. So your options basically are to do it yourself or to hire a relocation service. And a relocation service is certainly the easiest, the least stressful option. And it might be your only option if you're trying to move more than one pet per person, because usually airlines only allow one pet per person. But they are very expensive services. So you'll probably be quoted several $1,000s to move a medium-sized dog, and it's a door-to-door service, and you won't have to really do there's no hassle involved. You sign some paperwork when they ask you to sign it. Otherwise, they take care of everything. So if you've got more money than time, that might be the best option. So the airline requirements are the first place you need to begin. If you are used to traveling on a certain airline, don't limit yourself to that airline when it comes to moving pets. Look at their pet policy, their history with pets, and possibly make a change if you think that there's another airline that would be better for you. So I took Air France to bring my pets over. I thought the service was good. I think Air France did a good job, and I like it as an airline, so I recommend that. If you have a larger dog that you would like to bring in cabin, generally the in-cabin limit is about 15 pounds, but there is actually a French airline called La Compagnie, Lacompagnie, La Compagnie, and they will take dogs, I think, up to 30 pounds, possibly even more. So that's a great option if you have a larger dog that you're really adamant about keeping with you in the cabin. The dimensions for your pet carrying case, the dimensions for those are very specific for airlines. So the one that you have already that you use to take your dog or cat to the vet might not be what you might need to buy another one, especially if you're bringing on the plane. You might want something a little different. And if they're going in the cabin, it's a very specific set of measurements that you need to take according to the height and weight of your dog. As I said, snub-nosed breeds are going to be very difficult. The only option is either going on a ship or doing the private plane option. Usually it's one animal per person. There are some airlines that allow two per person, but also keep in mind the actual physical logistics of this. If you are a single person trying to bring two animals plus all of your luggage, think about how that's going to work. Make sure that you can actually carry and physically do all of these things. Otherwise, hopefully you have somebody to help you out with that, or you hire a relocation company. The seasons shouldn't be too much of an issue coming to France. However, keep in mind that if temperatures are too high or too low in either the origin or destination, you won't be allowed to bring an animal because it's too dangerous. So as I say, that's not really ever going to be an issue because France it doesn't get too hot here or too cold here, but it might be something that you pay attention to on the origin side, for example. And the departure and arrival times. You want to try and arrive during business hours. Try to avoid flights that will have you coming in the middle of the night, as you might run into more problems getting through customs. All right, so there are some restrictions. There are a few banned breeds that under no circumstances will be allowed to be imported to France. Those are listed in that first list there. And then there are some restricted breeds. So anything on that restricted breed list, you can bring into France, but you will need to apply for a license at the town hall when you get here. It's free, but you also will need to complete a course to make sure that you are competent to handle the dog. The dog will need to go under an assessment by a French vet, and you'll need to get insurance for liability. The dog must be sterilized, and you must out of the house always have the dog on a leash and be muzzled, which is not the case for any other kind of dog. So some restrictions there, something to be aware of. And then this was a funny one for me. I brought a Doberman in and I had never clipped her ears, but I found out that in fact, if I had clipped her ears, she may not have been allowed to be imported in because it's illegal here to clip ears for Dobermans. And apparently they also don't like to have the precedent set by importing dogs with those ears. So luckily for me, I never did that, but keep in mind that you might be held to different standards like that. If you're coming from a high rabies country, which are technically called unlisted countries, you must go through an additional titer test, which basically just proves that the rabies vaccination was valid and effective. I had to do this coming from Panama, and it was a complete surprise to me. We were actually meant to move to Paris in October of the year we moved. And because I did not know we had to do that test, we had to delay our moving date because it takes 3 months to get that test back. So you send in all the paperwork, it goes to the CDC in the States, and then they send it back. It may not take the full 3 months, but that's how much time you've got to give it. So we ended up moving in December. And if you're coming from the UK, the pet passport is currently still valid, although with Brexit, they still haven't really figured out what they want to do with that. But it doesn't seem like a high priority because they're still just letting pets come in on the same paperwork. And sorry, just about the high rabies countries, the US and Canada are fine, Mexico is fine. But if you're coming from any other country, look into whether it is listed or unlisted. So we start with the paperwork. There's an international health certificate. It needs to be filled out by a USDA, or if you're in Canada, a CFIA certified vet within 30 days of departure. You will also need a translated version as well as the English. And it also needs to be endorsed by the USDA or CFIA office within 10 days of travel. However, it can take up to 20 days to do that via regular mail. So if you don't have a USDA or CFIA office in your state or city, which you may not, you'll need to pay to make sure you have that overnighted as quickly as possible. But the best thing to do is to get it done on the spot if you're able to. And then the health certificate must be authenticated at your at the French consulate nearest you. So if you're coming from Canada, they must be apostilled before they are authenticated. But coming from the US, it's the reverse. So you must have it authenticated by the USDA and then apostilled by the Secretary of State. And then you'll get ready to fly. The biggest thing I think is to get them used to the crate, especially if it's a big cargo crate. So the one that I had was very, very large, and it split in half in the middle. So we took off the top half and she slept in the bottom half. We put her bed in there. She probably slept in the bottom half for about 6 months before we actually traveled. And then, I don't know, a few weeks, a couple months before we traveled, we put the lid on it. So she got used to being in it with the lid. At that point, it was already her space. So she felt very safe in there. She was happy to be in her bed while we were actually doing the travel. Pack their crate with clothing or a towel that smells like you. Make sure you have lots of extra food, some favorite toys in there, and some treats throughout. I personally think that there's a specific number of addresses that you must put on the crate. I wallpapered that thing with the address and phone number. I was so worried that something would get torn off or that it would rain and, the ink would run. So I really went overboard with it. I thought there's no reason, and you can't have too many addresses on there. And then, of course, don't forget your big dossier. That's a word you'll get used to if you start doing more paperwork in France. They love their dossiers. So you'll have a big file of paperwork. And then after you arrive, you may or may not need to check in with customs. So in my experience, they wanted nothing to do with me once we arrived. We got our pets, we put them on the carts, and we started moving. I have my dossier in my hand. I'm so proud of all my paperwork that took months and, cost all this money and back and forth and delayed our trip for 3 months. And I was so proud of it. And, it's this thick at that point for 2 animals. And I'm trying to give it to people. I'm trying to find customs. I'm trying to go and see if there's a vet that I'm supposed to see. And I just kept being told to keep moving, keep moving. I was holding up the line, get out the door, get out the door. I don't know if that was just, a certain day, a time of day where they were very busy and just shuttling people through. So it is possible that customs would stop you and look at your paperwork. Of course, you always want to have all that paperwork with you. In my experience, and this is the case with a lot of things in France, as long as you show you have the documents, they don't actually ever want to look at them. It's too much work. As long as you show you got that giant thick envelope full of documents, they might leaf through it, in other circumstances. In my experience, all they want to see is that you have it. They love to see lots of papers. So you probably won't need to see customs, but you definitely won't need to see a vet. That was something that was required when I brought my cat to Panama. I had to see a vet, and the vet's hours were very specific, and that's not something that you'll need to do in France. You will need to apply for an EU passport when you get here, which is a really, really useful little document that holds all of your pets' pertinent health information and travel information, their chip number and everything. It's a very convenient place to keep all of your pets' veterinary documents, etc. So I actually found it to be a really great thing to have. And finally, don't expect them to settle in right away. We always talk about the culture shocks that we will experience as humans, but keep in mind that your pets are also going to go through a transition, and it might not be that easy for them. So, for example, when we moved my cat from the East Coast of the US down to Panama, he was a rescue. So I don't know exactly what he might have been, but we think that he had Maine Coon in him, which is a northern cat with lots of hair, really, really thick, long fur, and they're larger than the average cat. And apparently, when we moved him to Panama, he was not happy. And I thought it was just him getting older. He's a grumpy old man. Turns out that he really hated the heat and humidity. So he was hiding pretty much the whole time we lived there, always looking for the coolest place to lay down. He no longer was snuggly or affectionate. And makes sense now, it was more body heat. So he was just trying to stay away from basically anything that would generate more heat around him. And when we moved here to Paris in December, as I mentioned, he was like, it was as if we'd turned back the clock 10 years. He was young again. He was affectionate and playful and, just very gregarious and wanting lots of attention and affection all the time again, and seemed much, much happier. Bella, on the other hand, was not happy about coming to the cold. She had never experienced the cold. She hated it. She didn't even want to go outside to pee. And it was also it's a much louder city than she was used to. Very, very different setup of city, Panama City versus Paris. So there's a lot more street noise here, lots of delivery trucks, people bustling, and just generally, it is a big new city, a lot of big new smells and sounds and everything. So it took her a while. I would say about 6 months to feel comfortable here. Little by little, she adapted. In the beginning, in Panama, I was used to walking her off leash. In the beginning, there's no way I could have ever tried that, because it was as if she lost control of her senses when we were outside. She didn't hear me. We had no connection. She was just skittering all around. Now, she is completely used to life here. She walks off leash all the time. We go to the park all the time, and she seems to love life here now. So they will adapt. In the beginning, I actually bought them a little homeopathic spray that was meant to calm them down. So there are options there. My cat actually was prescribed CBD at a certain point. So lots of holistic veterinary things to try here as well. And so that's my advice for bringing dogs to France. I definitely recommend bringing them with you. I think they're a great way to meet new people and to get adapted in your new home, to feel integrated, to feel like part of the community. And so I wish you and your four-legged loved ones safe travels, and welcome to France.